Welcome to Podkey Left and Right, where today's stories are really about power, narrative, and trust. A lot of this episode comes down to a simple question. When a claim spreads fast, what is actually verified and who benefits from the version you're hearing? That applies to war talk, court theatrics, surveillance, economics, and even the stories media ecosystems tell about themselves. One of the more uncomfortable patterns right now is that a supposedly fragmented media world can produce strikingly uniform rhetoric. The examples here are blunt. High-profile figures on the left and right repeating the same lines, sometimes nearly verbatim, even in grotesque moments, like celebratory good riddance posts after Lindsey Graham's death. The important point isn't that everyone secretly agrees on everything. It's that outrage, anti-establishment branding, and foreign policy contrarianism can create a shared incentive structure. That's where the so-called permanent wedding ring idea is useful. These aren't temporary edge cases where extremes touch. The argument is that mutual amplification is now a stable business model because it expands audience reach while laundering fringe positions through cross-ideological validation. Claims about a Tucker-Hassan alignment or a Treaty of Parsi should be treated carefully as framing, not as proven coordination. But the broader observation is well supported. People who present as opposites often converge on the same anti-intervention or anti-America message because the overlap is profitable, viral, and identity-reinforcing. Confirmed fact first, Lindsey Graham died at 71 from an aortic dissection, and that immediately mattered both symbolically and procedurally. His legacy is messy in a very recognizable Washington way. Earlier bipartisan work sat alongside his later alignment with Trump, which means any clean cartoon version of him is going to leave a lot out. What happened next is revealing. Foreign adversarial voices, openly celebrating his death, were taken by some hosts as proof that a hardline US interventionist had been useful to American deterrence. That argument has some force, but it's not dispositive. An adversary celebrating your opponent's death doesn't automatically prove every policy that person backed was wise. It does tell you something about perceived alignment of interests. The immediate appointment of his sister to finish the term also shows how quickly institutions move to preserve continuity when a Senate majority is at stake. In other words, the mourning and the power scramble were happening at the same time. On the US-Iran front, the confirmed core is that CENTCOM reported multiple rounds of strikes on Iranian assets after attacks tied to civilian shipping, and the administration announced a guardian of the Hormuz Strait plan. What's being sold politically is straightforward: deterrence, maritime protection, and making hostile behavior costly, including a proposed 20% toll or reimbursement on cargo moving through the strait. The hard questions start right there. A permanent escort mission sounds strong, but it is resource-intensive, vulnerable to mines and missiles, and hard to sustain without escalation risk. Then there's the legal and precedent problem. If the US normalizes charging for security in an international choke point, critics aren't wrong to ask what stops other states from trying similar logic elsewhere. So the policy may signal resolve, but the second-order effects could include more exposure, more friction with allies, and a more transactional norm around global waterways. This case is exactly where disciplined skepticism matters, because there are many anomalies and not enough publicly testable answers. The disputed surveillance footage, the judge seeing allegedly enhanced video, not shown publicly, mixed and degraded DNA, odd engraved cartridges, chain of custody questions around abandoned items, and body cam gaps all create legitimate reasons for scrutiny. But scrutiny is not the same as proof of fabrication. Degraded DNA can still be meaningful, and missing or incomplete video can come from incompetence, technical failure, or misconduct. Those are very different conclusions. The same goes for the physical oddities people keep citing, like rooftop items appearing late in the record, the charred shirt in Charlie Kirk's SUV, and the mismatch claims about the vehicle in footage. Those are red flags, not finished answers. The biggest institutional problem here may be procedural delay and information asymmetry. When probable cause rulings are postponed and key material is selectively described rather than transparently released, the vacuum gets filled by influencers, not by evidence. That leads naturally into the turning point and influencer angle. Even without proving some master conspiracy, the allegations of insider access, invited personalities, and live updates to major commentators point to a courtroom becoming a content arena. That matters because public perception can get shaped before factual disputes are resolved. Once a narrative hardens online, later corrections rarely catch up. This is also where broader information operation concepts become useful. The so-called fake questions, fake evidence, fake defenses pattern describes a real tactic, even if particular accusations inside a case remain unproven. The goal often isn't to convince everyone of one theory, it's to make shared reality feel impossible, so audiences retreat into tribe and trust whoever sounded confident first. The Justice Department subpoenaing New York Times reporters over Air Force One security reporting stands out because even leak investigations usually operate with more caution around the press. Legal experts calling that unusually aggressive is not just culture war spin. Reporter subpoenas can chill sourcing, and late-night tactics make the move look more punitive than narrowly tailored. At the same time, government does have a real interest in preventing disclosure of sensitive security details. The issue is whether the method respects First Amendment norms and whether less intrusive tools were exhausted first. A parallel concern shows up in the spread of automated license plate reader networks. Dense surveillance grids can be justified in the language of public safety while bypassing normal democratic oversight. And the missing context there is empirical. Critics are right that blanket data collection is often adopted faster than its crime reduction benefits are actually demonstrated. The Federal Reserve story is less dramatic but more consequential than most daily political fights. Its structure is deliberately awkward because awkwardness is part of the design. Regional banks, rotating votes, and long staggered terms are there to make it harder for elected officials to bully monetary policy into short-term election. Help? That doesn't make the Fed infallible. Forecasting is probabilistic, and mistakes happen. But the historical case for independence is much stronger than the case for direct political control, especially when pre-election rate cuts are the temptation. That matters because the economy may be drifting into the kind of problem the Fed handles badly. Low hiring and low firing at the same time, plus supply-side shocks from commodities, shipping, and geopolitics. If inflation pressure comes from disrupted supply more than overheated demand, rate policy can still suppress the economy without cleanly fixing the source of the pain. That's why stagflation worries aren't panic, but they also aren't empty headline bait. On energy, there's a genuine shift underway that deserves more precision than either boosterism or doom usually allows. Renewables hitting major cost and deployment milestones is real, and storage improvements are real. Multi-hour batteries are changing grid planning, and examples like California's scale-up show this is no longer a toy sector. But the bottlenecks are increasingly political and administrative. If thousands of local permitting regimes slow deployment, then the barrier isn't whether solar works, it's whether institutions can process abundance. That connects to the fight over AI data centers. Claims that data centers automatically drive household rates through the roof are too simplistic. Some analyses suggest the load can spread fixed grid costs and even modestly lower prices in some contexts. Still, local strain, water use, and siting conflicts are not invented concerns. The cleaner conclusion is that infrastructure arguments need granular grid analysis, not propaganda from either techno-utopians or geopolitical sabotage campaigns. The China story and the right story actually intersect more than they first appear to. Xi Jinping's system is built around the idea that the party should actively shape society, business, speech, and security. Purges, surveillance, industrial policy, and pressure on the PLA all fit that model. The strongest reason to take the threat seriously is not just Taiwan, though Taiwan matters enormously because of semiconductor concentration. It's that Beijing's model treats institutional independence as a bug to be eliminated. That's why debates over rights in the West matter beyond culture war. The theological argument that inalienable rights rest on a deeper view of the human person is not something everyone shares, but it is pointing at a real question: what protects the individual when utility, efficiency, or state necessity says otherwise? You don't need a single religious answer to see the policy relevance. Once people become mainly inputs, consumers, or security variables, rights get easier to negotiate away. That's the thread running through all of this: institutions asking for trust while narratives race far ahead of evidence. Thanks for listening to Podkey Left and Right. Stay curious and keep separating what's known from what's merely loud. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.